The dojo smelled of sweat and pine polish, the floorboards creaking softly under bare feet. Evening light slanted through the tall windows, catching dust in golden streaks. The black belt, lean, muscular, his GI crisp and spotless, stood in the center of the mat, smirking as he tied his belt with theatrical sharpness. On the side, pushing a mop across the floor with quiet rhythm, was Mr. Harris, the black janitor. His uniform was faded, shoes scuffed, but his movements were steady, controlled, almost too balanced for someone doing mundane chores. "Hey," the black belt called out, voice loud enough to draw chuckles from the students resting by the wall. "Why don't you put that mop down? Let's spar. For fun." The room erupted in light laughter. A few whispered, "The janitor? He doesn't even train here." Harris looked up, his eyes calm but unreadable. Slowly, he leaned the mop against the wall. "You sure you want that?" His voice was low, steady. The black belt grinned wider. "Don't worry, I'll go easy. Just show us what you've got." He bounced lightly on his feet, already relishing the attention of the crowd. The sensei raised an eyebrow but didn't intervene. The room was charged now, half curious, half amused. Phones came out, screens glowing as students prepared to record. Harris stepped onto the mat. He bowed, precise and respectful, as if the gesture had been engraved into him years ago. His movements carried no hesitation. The black belt winked at the crowd. "Ready, old man." The room buzzed with anticipation, but something in Harris's stillness hinted at more than what the black belt expected. The bell wasn't rung, but the moment the black belt lunged forward, the air in the dojo changed. What happened in the very first exchange left everyone holding their breath. The black belt darted in with a sharp front kick, the kind meant to test distance and intimidate. It sliced the air fast, but Harris wasn't there anymore. With a small shift of his weight, like water moving around a stone, he slid aside. The kick missed cleanly. The crowd laughed, thinking it was luck. The black belt smirked. "Okay, nice dodge." He threw a jab-cross combination, confident, sharp. Harris lifted one hand lazily, pairing with just his palm, redirecting each strike as though swatting away flies. The laughter in the room quieted. The black belt pressed harder. He spun into a back kick, his GI snapping like a whip. Harris dropped low, sweeping his leg in one motion. The black belt stumbled, nearly falling. Gasps rippled through the dojo. Phones tilted higher. No one laughed now. Harris stood calmly, hands still low. He didn't raise his fists like a fighter. He carried himself like a man who'd done this his whole life, but no longer needed to prove anything. "You said for fun," Harris murmured, voice even, "so don't take it personal." The black belt flushed. Pride pricked him like needles. He lunged again, more reckless, throwing a flurry of kicks. Harris moved with uncanny timing, sidestepping, pivoting, redirecting with the smallest touches. The room could hear every sharp exhale from the belt, and Harris's silence. One student whispered, "He's not just some janitor." The sensei's eyes narrowed. Recognition flickered, though he said nothing. Then without warning, Harris countered. The black belt charged with a high roundhouse, but Harris stepped inside, caught the leg at the thigh, and in one smooth motion swept him backward. The black belt hit the mat with a thud that shook the floor. The dojo froze, even the phones lowered. Harris didn't press the advantage. He simply let go, stepping back, giving the young man space to rise. The black belt's chest heaved, sweat slicked his brow. For the first time, his grin was gone. Around them, whispers turned into a quiet storm. "Who is this guy? Where did he learn that?" But Harris only adjusted his sleeves, waiting calmly. The fight wasn't over, but the power dynamic in the room had already shifted. And in the next exchange, Harris revealed something that silenced even the sensei. The black belt climbed to his feet, embarrassed heat rushing to his face. He brushed off his GI as if to erase the fall, but the echoes of it, thud, gasp, silence, still hung in the air. "Lucky sweep," he muttered, though his voice lacked conviction. Harris tilted his head slightly, his eyes steady, patient. He didn't gloat. He didn't need to. That calmness alone rattled the black belt more than the throw. The belt circled now, slower, studying Harris. He raised his guard higher, respecting what he couldn't explain. "Let's see what you really got," he hissed, snapping into a sudden feint before launching a spinning hook kick. The crowd leaned forward. It was his signature move, the one that usually drew applause in tournaments. But as his foot whipped toward Harris's head, Harris simply stepped half a pace forward, sighed the arc. The kick sliced empty air. Before anyone could blink, Harris tapped the black belt on the shoulder with 2 fingers, a gesture so casual it was insulting. The crowd broke into startled laughter, but then went silent again, realizing it wasn't mockery, it was control. The sensei's lips pressed into a thin line. His gaze never left Harris. "Where'd you learn that?" one of the students whispered aloud. The black belt growled, lunging with a desperate combination of elbows and knees. Raw power over form. Harris absorbed the energy without meeting force with force. He angled his hips, redirected, and, suddenly, the black belt was against the wall, Harris's forearm lightly across his chest. The room gasped. Harris hadn't struck him. He hadn't hurt him. But the message was unmistakable. "I can end this whenever I choose." Slowly, Harris stepped back, lowering his arm. He bowed slightly, respectful, as though reminding the younger man that this wasn't a battle, it was a lesson. The dojo was dead quiet now. Even the sound of the mop bucket in the corner felt loud. The black belt stood frozen, chest heaving, his arrogance drained into something unfamiliar. Doubt. Then the sensei finally spoke, his voice low, but it carried to every ear in the room. "Harris, I told you you'd never have to show them." Head snapped toward the janitor. Harris's eyes flickered, then softened as if caught in an old memory. He didn't answer yet. The next words from Harris revealed a past no one in the dojo could have imagined. Harris exhaled slowly, the way a man does when he knows silence won't protect him any longer. The students leaned forward. Even the black belt, still panting, forgot his bruised pride for a moment, waiting for an answer. "I swept these floors because I wanted peace," Harris said at last. His voice was even, not raised, but it carried through the dojo like a drumbeat. "But before that, I swept mats, just like these, in rings, in tournaments, in places you've only seen on TV." A ripple of disbelief moved through the students. The sensei's eyes softened, just for a breath. "National team," he murmured, almost to himself. The black belt blinked. "Wait, you were?" Harris gave a small, reluctant nod. "Champion. Years ago. I left it behind." He shrugged, almost apologetic. "Too many trophies, not enough life." The room filled with stunned silence. The mop, the uniform, the quiet routine. They had hidden a truth none of them imagined. "You're lying," the black belt said, though his tone had lost its sharpness. It sounded like someone grasping for footing on ground that kept shifting. Harris didn't argue. He simply shifted into stance, his feet planting with the kind of rooted grace no beginner, or even most advanced students, could fake. His body aligned, breath steady, center of gravity low. It wasn't just knowledge, it was mastery. One of the older students whispered, That's textbook." "No, better." The sensei cleared his throat. "You asked him to spar. Now you're learning what sparring really means." The black belt swallowed. Sweat trickled down his cheek, though the room wasn't hot. He looked at Harris differently now, not as a janitor, not even as an opponent, but as a mirror of what he might become, or fail to become. Still, pride forced him forward. "Then don't hold back," he said, though his voice cracked slightly. Harris's gaze lingered on him, steady, compassionate, unshaken. "If I don't hold back, son, you won't get up again." The weight of those words dropped into the room like a stone into deep water. No one laughed. No one dared. And yet the black belt, shaken but stubborn, stepped forward again, demanding Harris's full strength. The black belt's jaw tightened. His pride screamed louder than his common sense. "Then show me," he snapped, fists clenching. "Show me what you're hiding." Harris's eyes softened. "You don't want that." But the younger man charged anyway, launching a storm of punches, his breath ragged, desperation driving each strike. The crowd shifted nervously, phones trembling in their hands. Harris moved with a grace that looked almost unfair. He absorbed the energy without absorbing the blows, slipping left, pivoting right, letting the storm pass around him. Every failed strike made the silence in the dojo heavier. Then Harris stepped in. One palm strike, gentle, precise, landed square on the black belt's chest. It didn't look violent, yet it knocked the air out of him. The belt staggered back, clutching his ribs, collapsing to one knee. The dojo gasped, but Harris didn't advance. He crouched beside him, voice calm, almost fatherly. "Control," Harris whispered. "That's the part you don't understand yet. Power without control is chaos, and chaos will eat you alive." The black belt lifted his head, eyes burning with humiliation, but also something else, a flicker of realization. Sensei finally spoke, breaking the silence. Now you see why Harris never needed the spotlight. He carries something greater than trophies. Students glanced at each other, shaken. The janitor, the man who'd blended into the background for months, had just dismantled their top fighter without breaking a sweat. The black belt gritted his teeth, pushing himself upright again. "I'm not done." Harris straightened, tilting his head. "Neither am I." The weight of his words wasn't a threat, it was a promise. A promise of another lesson, deeper than the first. The room held its breath, every pair of eyes locked on the two men as they squared off once more. And in the next exchange, Harris wouldn't just teach the black belt a lesson, he'd shake the entire dojo's idea of strength itself. The air inside the dojo felt heavy now, as if the walls themselves were leaning in to witness. The black belt steadied himself, jaw clenched, body aching but pride still alive. His breathing was ragged, but his glare refused to dim. Harris stood across from him, calm as still water. No flexing, no showmanship, just presence. It was the kind of composure born not in gyms or tournaments, but in life itself. "Come on," the belt hissed, shaking out his arms. "If you're really who they say you are, stop holding back." Harris's eyes met his. A quiet pause stretched, like the silence before thunder. Then he moved. The room gasped, not at violence, but at precision. Harris's steps were poetry. One slide forward, one pivot, a flick of the wrist, and suddenly the black belt's balance was gone again. His body tilted, his foot slipped, and before he knew it, he was flat on the mat, staring at the ceiling lights. This time, Harris didn't even look down at him. He just stood over him, his stance loose, his breathing steady. "Strength," Harris said evenly, "is not what you use to crush others. It's what you use to lift them up." The crowd stirred. Students shifted uncomfortably, their pride bruised alongside their champions. But there was awe in their eyes too, an awe that edged into respect. The black belt pushed up slowly, chest heaving, humiliation burning hotter than pain. He wanted to scream, to swing again, but something in Harris's tone froze him. The sensei finally stepped forward, his voice deep and deliberate. "Now you understand. Harris doesn't clean this floor because he has to. He does it because he chooses humility. And humility is harder than any fight." The words cut sharper than any punch. The black belt lowered his eyes, his fists loosening. For the first time, his body language looked less like defiance and more like surrender. Not to Harris, but to truth. Harris bowed lightly. Not to humiliate, but to honor the lesson given and the one received. The dojo remained silent, as if waiting for what the black belt would do next. And then, with the eyes of every student on him, the black belt made a decision no one expected. The dojo stayed frozen in that silence, the kind that felt alive, buzzing, sharp, like the air before a storm. All eyes were on the black belt, his chest rising and falling, his pride dragging him in two directions at once. His fists twitched at his sides, but there was no strike left in him. What Harris had shown wasn't domination, it was something deeper, something that stripped away the need to prove, leaving only truth. The black belt finally lifted his gaze. He stared at Harris, not with arrogance anymore, but with a mixture of frustration, respect, and something more vulnerable, curiosity. "Why?" he asked hoarsely. "Why hide here? You could be teaching, leading. Why mop floors?" The students murmured, echoing the question. Even the sensei's eyes lingered, though he already knew the answer. Harris exhaled slowly. He untied the ragged apron around his waist, folding it with deliberate care before setting it aside on the bench. When he spoke, his words were measured, carrying the weight of years. "Because," Harris said, "when I was your age, I thought fighting was everything. I wanted the medals, the roar of the crowd, the spotlight, and I got it." His gaze drifted briefly to the dojo wall, as if seeing something long gone. "But I lost myself along the way. Friends, family, I traded them for applause. And when the lights dimmed, I realized applause doesn't keep you warm at night." The room was quiet but heavy, the students hanging on every word. Even the youngest ones, who had only seen glory in highlight reels, suddenly felt the shadows behind it. "So I came here," Harris continued, "to sweep floors, fix broken mats, and listen more than I speak. To remind myself every day that greatness isn't in the trophies you keep. It's in the humility to serve, even when you could stand on a pedestal. The black belt swallowed hard. His breathing steadied, his shoulders sagging as if the fight drained out of him at last. Not by force, but by truth. For the first time he bowed, a deep bow, low and deliberate. "Teach me," he whispered. His voice cracked, raw but genuine. A ripple went through the dojo. Gasps, wide eyes, even a few hushed cheers. Students had never seen their champion bend. Not like this. Harris regarded him, then shook his head gently. "You've already learned the first lesson," he said. "Humility. The rest will come if you remember this moment." The sensei stepped forward, his voice rich with pride. "Class dismissed." His eyes flicked to Harris, carrying unspoken gratitude. The students filed out slowly, still whispering, replaying every move in their minds. Some stole glances back at Harris as if seeing him for the first time. The black belt lingered, staring at his own hands. Pride and shame wrestled inside him, but underneath a seed had been planted, one he couldn't ignore. And as Harris picked up his mop again, his movements just as steady, just as humble, the entire dojo felt changed. The man who once blended into the background was now impossible to unsee. But outside those walls, word of what happened began to spread, until Harris's quiet past came knocking once more. The next morning, the dojo buzzed before class even began. Students huddled in corners, whispering with excitement. Someone had uploaded clips of the spar to social media, shaky phone footage capturing Harris's effortless movements. By sunrise, the video had spread across town, gathering views, comments, disbelief. "Isn't that Mr. Harris, the janitor?" One caption read. "Janitor? That man's a master," another shot back. When Harris arrived with his mop and bucket, conversation stopped mid-sentence. Every pair of eyes followed him. He walked with the same unhurried pace as always, but something in the air had shifted. Respect hung there now, thick and undeniable. The black belt was already on the mat, warming up silently. His movements, usually sharp and cocky, now carried restraint. When Harris passed, he bowed. The gesture was small but heavy, and the dojo noticed. "Words out," the sensei said quietly as Harris set down his bucket. "You can't stay invisible anymore." Harris gave a faint smile. "I wasn't trying to be invisible, just ordinary." But ordinary was no longer possible. That afternoon, two men in crisp suits came to the dojo. They weren't students. They carried themselves differently, like officials or scouts. They asked for Harris by name. The sensei's brow furrowed. "He doesn't teach here," he said cautiously. "That's not what we've heard," one replied, holding up a phone with the video still playing. "A man like this shouldn't be cleaning floors. There are competitions, seminars, even national programs that could use him." Harris overheard but didn't look up from his mop. He finished the last stroke on the floor before answering. "I had my time. That time's over." The officials pressed, but Harris's refusal was firm, calm, unshakable. Eventually they left, muttering about wasted talent. Students surrounded him after, their faces full of questions. Some begged him to teach. Others simply stared in awe. But Harris raised his hands gently. "Don't mistake what you saw," he told them. "Strength isn't a performance. It's a responsibility. If you chase the crowd, you'll lose yourself. If you serve quietly, you'll find who you are." The black belt listened most intently. He no longer burned with humiliation. Instead, he carried a new hunger, different from before. A hunger for wisdom, not applause. "Mr. Harris," he said at last, his voice steady, "I know you don't want students, but I need to learn, not just to fight, to be like that." He gestured at Harris's calm, his balance, his unshakable center. The dojo fell silent again, waiting. Harris looked at the young man, saw the pride cracked open, saw the seed of humility sprouting. "Then stay after class," Harris said quietly. "Mop with me. That's where it starts." The students blinked, unsure if he was joking. But the black belt bowed deeply, eyes shining with something new. "Yes, sir." And so, as others packed up, the black belt stayed behind, mop in hand, moving in rhythm beside the man he once mocked. A different kind of training had begun, quiet, unseen, but more powerful than any sparring session. And soon the lessons Harris passed on in silence would ripple far beyond the dojo walls. Oh, and if you've been following Harris's journey and want to see what comes next, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Your support helps us bring more stories like this to life. The rhythm of the mop echoed across the dojo floor. Swish, press, turn, swish again. At first, the black belt mimicked awkwardly, his grip too tight, shoulders stiff. Harris watched without correction, only nodding when the boy's movements softened. "You see," Harris said, "even mopping can be training. Every stroke teaches balance, patience, rhythm. A fighter who cannot master stillness will never master movement." The black belt frowned but obeyed, his breath slowing, his body sinking with the simple task. Sweat dotted his brow, though not from combat this time. He was learning discipline the quiet way, the way Harris had carried all along. Days passed. Students whispered when they noticed their champion staying after class, side by side with the janitor. At first they laughed, but gradually the laughter faded. Soon others lingered too, asking if they could join. Harris never invited them, never advertised himself as a teacher. But those who came to learn in silence were never turned away. One evening, as the sun dipped low, painting the dojo windows gold, Harris paused mid-mop. His gaze lingered on the black belt, whose movements had become fluid, humble, free of showmanship. "You're learning," Harris said simply. The young man bowed. "Not enough, not yet, but I'm different, I feel it." Before Harris could reply, the dojo door slid open. A tall figure stepped inside. An old rival, his GI pristine, his belt as black as midnight. Whispers filled the room instantly. Everyone knew his name, Coach Daniels, a man who had built a reputation on flash and dominance, the opposite of Harris. "I heard stories," Daniel said, his voice sharp. His eyes cut straight to Harris. "Didn't think they were true. Guess the legend's been mopping floors while the world moved on." The room went tense. Harris didn't flinch. "Even legends get tired of fighting," Daniel smirked. "Or maybe you were afraid of being forgotten. Afraid of me." The students bristled, glancing between the two men. The black belt stepped forward instinctively, but Harris lifted a hand, stopping him. "Fear?" Harris's tone was calm, but steel hid underneath. "No, I just chose peace." Daniels dropped his bag on the floor with a heavy thud. "Then choose again. One match. Here, now." The dojo buzzed with nervous energy. Phones appeared. Students whispered that this was bigger than sparring. This was history. Harris sighed as if the weight of old battles had returned. He hadn't wanted this. But sometimes peace meant facing the storm so others could learn. He set the mop aside. Slowly he bowed. And with that single bow, the dojo realized they were about to witness a clash that would redefine strength itself. The air thickened as Harris straightened from his bow. Daniel smirked, rolling his shoulders, radiating the confidence of a man who had never been humbled. Students pressed against the walls, their breaths shallow, phones trembling in their hands. The black belt watched from the corner, fists clenched. He'd wanted to spar with Harris for pride. Daniels was here for something else. Domination. The spotlight Harris had walked away from long ago. They stepped onto the mat. No bell rang, but the room seemed to know exactly when it began. Daniels struck first, fast and explosive. Kicks cracking like thunder, fists slicing air. Harris moved like water again, flowing around each strike, redirecting, conserving. Where Daniels burned hot, Harris stayed cool. The clash was stark, flash versus flow, noise versus silence. Then Daniels overextended, his spinning kick whistling just inches too wide. Harris stepped in, his palm brushing Daniels' chest. Not violent, not cruel, but exact. Daniels toppled, his body thudding against the mat, breath ripped from his lungs. The dojo erupted in gasps. Daniels roared, scrambling back, his pride demanding retaliation. He lunged again, more furious than before. Harris absorbed it all. Sidesteps, parries, quiet redirections. His movements painted a story. This wasn't about defeating Daniels. It was about showing every student what mastery truly looked like. Finally, with a subtle sweep and a guiding hand, Harris pinned Daniels face first against the mat. Silence crashed over the dojo. Harris didn't hold him there long, just enough to prove control. Then he stepped back, allowing Daniels to rise. Daniels staggered, chest heaving, eyes wide with disbelief. He glared at Harris but found no gloating, no taunt, only calm. That humility broke him more than the throw. The sensei stepped forward, voice solemn. "Strength without wisdom will always crumble. Tonight you've all seen the difference." The students bowed one after another, not to Daniels but to Harris. Even the black belt bowed deepest, gratitude etched across his face. Daniels grabbed his bag and stormed out, his pride wounded, his footsteps echoing like thunder, fading into distance. Harris, meanwhile, bent down, picked up his mop and resumed where he left off, steady, humble, unshaken. The sight brought tears to more than one pair of eyes. The black belt whispered, almost to himself, "That's what real power looks like." And from that night on, the dojo changed. Harris never put up a sign, never called himself master, but his lessons spread quietly, reshaping not just fighters, but people, reminding them that humility, balance, and control would always outweigh arrogance and noise. Harris had returned to the shadows he chose, but his light would never be unseen again.